as I've shared with you, this month, these last number of weeks, has been about really looking at how to engage our spiritual practices and beliefs and teachings in times that, for many of us, feel very uncertain or feel very turbulent, whether it is looking at what's going on politically and the division that we still feel in our country, or whether it is what we look at when we see what's going on in the world globally, the many places that there is still so much unrest and violence, or as we look at what's going on economically, and maybe we feel that it's just really hitting us and we're figuring out, how do we make ends meet? How do we make sense of what's going on? And if there's ever a time for us to be anchored in our teachings, it really is when everything else seems to be in a state of uncertainty or a state of turbulence. And today we want to look at the practicality of love, not the hallmark version of love, as sweet and as beautiful as that may be, but the practicality of love, the power of love, not as an emotion, but the power of love as a real force, a real force. We're going to be looking at ideas of compassion and forgiveness and service. And these are not new ideas to us. They're not new ideas to us as students of unity and metaphysics. And yet, as students of unity, as students of metaphysics, we recognize the importance of continuing to practice and to be reminded, because it's so easy to forget, right? It's so easy to get caught up in the difficulty or the struggle or the challenge or the confusion. And so we come together to remind ourselves and to remind each other. You know, when Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? He gave a commandment, an instruction about love. He said the greatest commandment is to love God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And then he went right into a follow-up on that. And the second is to love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself, but to love your neighbor as yourself. I don't know how we can love God or love the divine without putting into practice loving our neighbor as ourself. To put love into action and to put it into action in ever-widening circles. I've been in unity long enough to have seen the maturing and the evolution of our application of our teachings. In the early days of unity, and I think this was also true in the early days of science of mind and Christian Science, the focus was really on helping the individual to heal, helping the individual to manifest and create more of the life that they desired for themselves. And while that is still very much a part of our teaching, where I think we have matured and evolved in our teaching is that we recognize we must not stop with the self. We need to carry that forward in ever-widening circles and not ending those circles just with our family and our friends and people that look like or think like we do. That it is the ever-widening circle, the ever-extension of the application of our teachings and practices. And so the evolution is to not just be mindful of oneself, but to be present to and mindful of the other as well. And so I want to share with you some things that we can do, but I also want to kind of put it in context of something that's important for us to remember about love. And what I think is important for us to remember about love is that love is an antidote to fear. I began this series by talking about the fear that many people are feeling today because of the situations and circumstances we find ourselves in. That fear seems to be higher for many people now than it has been perhaps in previous times. And one of our spiritual beliefs or teachings in metaphysics is this teaching, this belief that love is the antidote to fear. The antidote to fear. It's the way that we can transcend fear. I want to share a bit about two teachers who really presenced this idea of love being the antidote to fear. The first is an Irish theologian and philosopher by the name of John O'Donohue. He lived from 1956 to 2008, and he was one of the earlier pioneers, really, in exploring the relationship between love and fear. Exploring the relationship between love and fear. And he concluded that the only antidote to fear is the active practice of love. Love not as an emotion, but love as a power, love as a fundamental force. He compared these two. He said that fear is like a constricting force. Think about it for a moment. Fear is like this constricting force that limits, whereas love is an expansive and opening force. He said the underlying nature of fear stemmed from feeling vulnerable, isolated, or insecure. I think there's a lot of that we're experiencing today. A lot of people feeling vulnerable, isolated, or insecure. You know, one of the challenges that we, I think, are still trying to find our way through is the feeling of loneliness and isolation that we experienced during the lockdown of COVID. And I think many people are still experiencing some of the lingering effects of that, of feeling isolated or disconnected. When we gather together in person as we do, one of the things I hear quite frequently from those of you who come back, you've been with us online, but you've decided to come back in person, is that there's a feeling that you have when we are together that just isn't the same when we are watching through a screen. I mean, it's great that we have the ability to do that, but there's something that we experience when we are together, right? Human beings are social beings. We really do need each other, and we need each other to come together in a spirit of compassion, in a spirit of unity, in a spirit of genuine care for one another. And so Donahue believed that the underlying nature of fear is this feeling of vulnerability, this feeling of being isolated or insecure, and that love was the way to solve that, to transcend that. Essentially, his message is that love is not merely an emotion, but a fundamental force that can counteract fear and lead us toward greater wholeness and fulfillment. So every time that we choose to be an expression of love, every time we choose love over fear, every time we choose to hold a loving thought for ourselves or for another, we are helping to lift the energy of the whole body of humanity up, even a teeny tiny bit. And when we do that cumulatively, when we do that collectively, it begins to make a difference. The other individual that many of you are probably familiar with, who really talked a lot about this idea of love being the answer to fear, is Jerry Jampolsky. How many of you remember Jerry Jampolsky? He was very, very popular in the 70s and the 80s. He was a medically trained doctor, a medically trained psychiatrist, got his training at Stanford University, and wrote the best-selling book in the 70s, Love is Letting Go of Fear. His work primarily, though he was trained as a psychiatrist, he worked with adults, but he really focused on children. And he focused on children who were diagnosed with a terminal illness. And he devoted his time to trying to understand how to help them deal with the fear and their families to deal with the fear of what those children were experiencing. And again and again and again, he talked about and emphasized the importance of shifting from the natural human inclination to be afraid when there are things that we don't understand or we don't want or we don't like, and to shift that as best we can. Not going to do it perfect, not going to do it every single time, but to shift it as best we can to the practice of love, to choosing love over fear. I don't know if it was he who first coined or expressed this thought, but I know he taught it frequently, and it's a common thought and practice in metaphysics, is to ask oneself, what would love do? What would love do when we're feeling confused, when we have a decision to make, when we're afraid, when we feel upset, irritated? If we can pause just for a moment, and in that pause, genuinely and authentically hold the question, what would love do? We're going to find ourselves opening up to a very rich and very life-transformative way of being. What would love do? Can you imagine if in every business, before the business meeting or before any important decision, in any governing body, that question was held and asked, what would love do? What would love do? Do you think any of the decisions might be a little bit different? Yeah, probably a whole lot different. A whole lot different. What would love do? What would love have me say to this person? How would love have me drive? That's a real leveler, isn't it? Right? How would love have me show up? How would love have me interact with this person that I just find so irritating? What would love through me do in this moment? So it's important to recognize, as these two great teachers, Donahue and Jampolsky and others, really emphasize that love is the antidote to fear. So when you're feeling afraid, personally or collectively, hold the thought, hold the question, what would love do right now? And then some simple practices. And again, these are not going to be things you've never heard of before, but they're going to be things that every one of us will benefit if we remind ourselves of them and commit to practicing them. And the first of these three ideas is compassion, the practice of compassion. Compassion for yourself and compassion for the other. Compassion for yourself and compassion for the other. What compassion looks like to me is mindfulness. Mindfulness. Do any of you have a critical, naysaying voice in your mind? Am I the only one that still has to deal with this critical committee that comes out every once in a while and more often than I like? And one of the ways that we deal with that, we can deal with that, is to be mindful of it when it's going on and to hold a thought or an affirmation such as, let me be mindful and gracious and compassionate to myself in this moment. Let me send that critical committee to voicemail. Let me practice mindfulness for myself, gentleness for myself, and for the other as well. To me, just holding the idea of mindfulness in our relationships is a powerful way to bring love into the relationship. That I'm going to be mindful of of how you're showing up in front of me. I'm going to be mindful of your tone of voice. I'm going to be mindful of the expression on your face. I'm going to be mindful of the body language that you are showing. Are you hurting? Are you afraid? Is there some encouragement out of my compassion that I can show to you? So cultivating compassion for ourselves and others involves being mindful. When we're mindful, we notice the opportunity to express compassion. If we're not mindful, we're going to miss the telltale signs of another's hurt or our own hurt and discomfort. It's cultivating the awareness of our common humanity. We are really so much more alike than we are different. When we really get at the things that are really important, family, kindness, fairness, a chance for all to thrive, I think we basically share the same kinds of values. Would you not agree? How we get them, whether that's individually or through policy, we may differ on greatly. But I think if we can separate out the how, we will find that the what, the values, we agree on quite a lot. So cultivating compassion for yourself, cultivating compassion for the other by being mindful. Second practice is a practice of forgiveness. I don't know how we can be anchored in love if we are holding on to resentment and hurts. There's not one of us in this room that has not had any number of things happen to us that have hurt us, that we could feel resentful of or hurt by. It's a great human equalizer, isn't it? We've all been hurt. We've all experienced varying degrees of betrayal or being treated unfairly or harshly, on and on and on and on. Forgiveness is a necessary spiritual practice. It's a part of what love looks like, the active form of love. Forgiveness does not mean that we condone the wrong that has been done. Forgiveness means that we are making a choice to no longer hold on to the resentment that's eating away inside of us. Some acts that we have experienced require a much longer journey in the practice of forgiveness. You've heard me say that sometimes we have to begin with the idea of, God, Spirit, help me want to forgive. Right? It's never about condoning or ignoring or not addressing wrong when wrong is done. But to pay twice for that by holding on to the hurt, by holding on to the resentment, by holding on to the bitterness, does nothing for the other and does tremendous harm for us. So the practice of forgiveness in releasing past hurts and resentments is an important part of being anchored in the experience of love. In the experience of love. And the third that I want to speak to is the importance of extending acts of kindness. Extending acts of kindness. Remember when the idea of practicing random acts of kindness became a really popular thing? I think we need to bring that back. I was away at Unity Village this past week from Sunday through just end of day on Thursday, attending the Unity World Headquarters board meetings. And one of our board members was wearing a t-shirt, "Just be kind." And I thought, boy, in a way that says it all, right? Just be kind. Let's make our country, let's make our families, let's make our world kinder. Let me ask you just a very basic question. As you look inside yourself, is there, and you don't have to answer this out loud, but is there any room in you to be a little kinder than you have been? Is there any place or room for improvement in being kinder? I bet there is. I know there is for me, and I consider myself to be a pretty decent and pretty kind person, but I also know there are any number of times I'm not as kind as I could be. I notice that if I'm in a hurry, if I'm rushed, if I'm trying to get from point A to point B, I may not be the kindest, most patient driver. Any of you relate to that? You know, instead of letting the person in, instead of saying, no, you go. You know, that's an expression of kindness, is it not? I'll tell you, I had a first ever experience this past week. Getting from San Diego to Kansas City last Sunday was difficult. I've done a fair amount of traveling all around the world, but this was a trip that was a nightmarish trip. So because I was doing the Sunday service, I couldn't get a direct nonstop flight from San Diego to Kansas City, so I had a layover in Phoenix. Well, the plane that was going to take us from Phoenix to Kansas City was 2.5 hours late. So I was like, okay, instead of getting into Kansas City at 8:40, now I'm going to get into Kansas City 2.5 hours later. So I always travel with my computer, had plenty of things that I could do, and just sat down and did some work. And then when we finally got on the plane from Phoenix to Kansas City, about, maybe 20 minutes into the flight, the stewardess came online and said, "Do we have any doctors or nurses on the plane?" Now, I've never, in all of my travels, heard that. And you could feel the energy and fear that was rising as the stewardesses and stewards were trying to find out if we had a doctor or nurse. And there was a doctor in training and a nurse available. And so all of this activity was happening behind me. Now, mind you, we're already 2.5 hours late, right? The stewardess and the doctor and the nurse started to tend to a patient that seemed to be going into a diabetic coma and unconscious. And then we have this announcement: we're going to need to make an emergency landing in Albuquerque. Well, my geography was off because I thought, well, Phoenix to Kansas City, we should have made up a bunch of time. Well, actually, we hadn't. We had basically lost time. So made an emergency landing in Albuquerque. And anyway, there were more things that happened with it. You get off the plane, don't get off the plane. Get off the plane, take your stuff, don't take your stuff. The emergency landing was to be able to get this gentleman and his family off the plane and get him into the hospital. The reason I shared this is I witnessed, and it was so inspiring to me. Everyone seemed to be as loving and kind and patient and tolerant as I have seen a group of people be, non-unity people, in a very, very long time. You know, this was a perfect situation. They dropped us off in Albuquerque. They did eventually make us get off the plane because the plane had to be weighed with none of us on it because of fuel requirements and stuff like that. Mind you, the Albuquerque airport at this time was dead. Couldn't get a drink. Only the bathrooms were open. Didn't get to Kansas City until about 1:30 in the morning. Very, very long. But everybody, it was like witnessing what we are capable of. We are capable of tremendous kindness. We just need to remember that and not just exercise it in emergency situations. I thought to myself, this is exactly the care that I would want if I were the one having a medical emergency, or if my family member was having a medical emergency. This idea of being kind to one another, extending service, extending kindness, letting the other person in, letting the other person ahead of you in line, paying attention to how can I show up right here, right now, kinder, surprising people with little acts of kindness. I don't know who said this, but I like it. Kindness is contagious. Be a carrier. Isn't that great? Kindness is contagious. Be a carrier. The Dalai Lama, repeating what I shared with you in the readings time. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. We are interconnected. We are interconnected. You are not your brother's keeper. I am not my brother's keeper. I am my brother. You are your brother. I am your sister. You are my sister. We are connected. Think of a spider web. Think of when you touch. Have you ever watched a spider web in the wind, or when a drop of dew hits a spider web? I'm not fond of spiders, but I love spider webs. I really do. The tiniest touch to a spider web, tiniest breeze to the whole thing moves. The challenge for you and me and some of the things we're talking about is they're so subtle. They're tiny. And in their subtleness and in their tininess, it's so easy to think it really doesn't matter. But you know what? It really does matter. And every act of kindness, every time you and I choose a loving thought or a loving action over hatred or meanness or fear, we are adding to that ripple effect. And we are helping to live out this second part of our mission, to not only transform our lives, but to be about what we can be about, to heal our world with love. And so my invitation to us is to join together in really being anchored in love. And as we are in these times that can be frightening and uncertain for many of us, we will find our way through, and we will take each other through together. Namaste.